A teenage girl living in a quiet suburban town vanished after telling her mother she was stepping out on a date one Friday night in 2011. Police suggested she ran away. No signs of a struggle, no witnesses, no evidence she ever met anyone at all. For years, the case went cold. Then, 9 years later, a forgotten voicemail surfaced from an old carrier archive, her voice strained, whispering a name no one recognized. Investigators replayed it once and realized the message had never been meant to be heard. What they found next rewrote everything. The last thing her mother remembered was how ordinary everything felt. The house was filled with the low hum of evening television, the smell of reheated leftovers lingering in the kitchen. Outside, the sun was already slipping behind the neighboring rooftops, leaving the street washed in a dull amber glow. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, one hand on the railing, her phone glowing faintly in her palm. "I'll be back later," she said casually. "Just going on a date." Her mother barely looked up at first. "With who?" There was a pause, brief, but long enough to matter. "Just someone," she replied, forcing a small smile. "You don't know him." That was it. No argument, no warning, no sense that those words would become the last explanation she ever gave. She was 17, old enough to crave independence, young enough that her parents still tracked the time she came home. She'd always been reliable, good grades, a small, close circle of friends. No history of sneaking out or disappearing without warning. That's why the comment didn't raise alarms. Teenagers went on dates. Teenagers wanted privacy. She went back upstairs to change, music faintly playing from her bedroom. Her mother later remembered hearing a drawer open, then close. Footsteps, silence. When she came down again, she was wearing jeans, a dark hoodie, and sneakers. Her hair was pulled back loosely, the way she did when she didn't want to look like she was trying too hard. She checked her phone once more, thumbs moving quickly, then slid it into her pocket. "What time will you be back?" her mother asked. "I don't know," she said. "Not late." The front door opened. Cool air rushed in, then it closed behind her with a soft final click. She never came back. At first, no one worried. An hour passed. Then 2. Her mother sent a text. "Everything okay?" No response. Another message followed. Then a call. Straight to voicemail. By midnight, the living room lights were still on. The television muted. Her mother sat rigid on the couch, phone clutched in her hand, replaying the last conversation over and over. Just a date. The words began to feel thin, rehearsed like something memorized rather than spontaneous. Friends were called. None of them knew about a date. No one had met a new boyfriend. No one had seen her that night. One friend mentioned she'd seemed distracted at school earlier that week, checking her phone more than usual. Another remembered her asking vague questions about meeting someone new, but never offering details. By morning, panic had settled into something heavier. Police arrived midday. They asked the standard questions. What was she wearing? Did she have money? Had she ever talked about running away? The answers were all wrong for the theory that quickly took shape. No packed bag, no cash withdrawn. Her laptop sat open on her desk, homework half finished. Her favorite necklace was still on the dresser. Everything suggested she'd planned to come home. Investigators focused on the date. Who was he? Where did they plan to meet? Her phone was examined, but messages had been deleted, nothing unusual for a teenager, they said. Social media showed no obvious clues. No secret boyfriend, no public arguments, just fragments. The last confirmed activity on her phone was a short text sent minutes before she left the house. It wasn't to her mother. It wasn't to any of her friends. The recipient was a number no one recognized. Cell records showed her phone pinging a nearby tower less than a mile from home, then nothing. No movement across town, no long drive, just a signal that appeared and stopped. As night fell again, her bedroom remained untouched. Her shoes were still by the door, her bed neatly made. And slowly, painfully, one question began to eclipse all the others: if she was really on a date. Why did no one know who she was meeting? By the second night, sleep became impossible. Her mother sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, the glow of her phone illuminating the same unanswered messages. Each buzz, every vibration sent a jolt through her chest, only to dissolve into disappointment. Outside, the street was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of stillness that made absence feel louder than noise. When police returned the next morning, they brought maps. They spread them across the dining table, tracing lines with capped pens. Cell towers, coverage zones, timestamps. One officer explained it carefully, gently, as if softer words could soften what the data implied. Her phone had pinged a tower less than a mile from home at 8:42 p.m., roughly 12 minutes after she walked out the door. That part made sense. She could have been walking, waiting, meeting someone nearby. But then there was nothing. No additional pings, no movement across town, no signal hopping from tower to tower like a phone normally would if someone was driving or even walking a few blocks farther. The signal didn't fade gradually, it stopped. "Phones die all the time," one officer said, almost apologetically. Her mother shook her head. Her battery was nearly full. They'd checked that already. The phone company confirmed it. Over 80% remaining at the time of the last activity. Enough power to last hours, maybe days. Investigators canvassed the area where the signal ended. Quiet residential streets, a small strip of woods behind an abandoned parking lot. A bus stop. Nothing stood out. No witnesses reported a struggle. No one remembered seeing a girl waiting nervously, or arguing, or getting into a car. It was as if she'd stepped into that spot and evaporated. At school, whispers spread faster than facts. Lockers slammed harder. Teachers lowered their voices when her name came up. Friends replayed their last conversations with her, searching for clues they were sure they'd missed. One friend remembered her asking, "Do you think people can pretend to be someone else online forever?" At the time, it had sounded like a random thought. Now it echoed differently. Police asked about social media again. Dating apps, messaging platforms, gaming chats. Anything where strangers could hide behind usernames. Her accounts showed activity, but nothing overtly dangerous. No threats. No explicit plans. Just casual conversations that faded into nothing. Then came the theory. She may have run away, a detective suggested during a tense meeting. Sometimes teens plan these things quietly. The room went cold. Run away but without clothes? Without money? Without telling the friend she trusted with everything? The theory felt convenient, a way to explain the unexplainable. Search dogs were brought in. They followed her scent from the front door down the sidewalk, then lost it abruptly near the same area where the phone signal ended. Handlers exchanged uneasy glances. Scent trails didn't just stop unless something interfered. A vehicle, water, or deliberate concealment. Days turned into weeks. Tips poured in, most useless, some cruel. A girl who looked like her spotted at a gas station 2 counties away. A blurry photo sent anonymously that turned out to be someone else entirely. Each false hope took something with it. Late one night, as her mother scrolled through old phone records again, she noticed something she'd missed before. The final outgoing action on her daughter's phone wasn't a call. It was a voicemail attempt unsent. No one knew who it was meant for. Or why. It never went through. At the time, investigators dismissed it as a glitch. But years later, that forgotten detail would become the one thing that refused to stay buried. By the 3rd year, her name was no longer said out loud as often. The missing posters that once covered telephone poles and storefront windows curled at the edges, bleached pale by sun and rain. Some were torn down. Others were simply ignored, part of the background now, like graffiti no one remembered appearing. Life, cruelly efficient, kept moving. The police case did too, but only barely. The lead detective had changed twice. Each handoff came with thinner files, fewer active leads, and the same quiet warning. There's nothing new. Officially, the investigation remained open. In reality, it had slipped into a category no one liked to acknowledge: inactive. Her mother refused to accept that word. Her daughter's bedroom stayed exactly the same. Clothes folded, bed made, phone charger still plugged into the wall, waiting. Sometimes, late at night, she sat on the edge of the bed and imagined the sound of the front door opening, the rhythm of familiar footsteps. Every passing car outside sparked a brief, painful hope. One detective, only one, continued to check in long after protocol, said he didn't have to. He'd always felt uneasy about the runaway theory. He'd worked those cases before. They left patterns, digital trails, quiet preparations. This case had none of that. Instead, it had absence. Suddenness. A hard stop where a life should have kept going. He revisited the phone records on his own time, the deleted messages, the unknown number, the unsent voicemail attempt. All of it felt intentional. But intention didn't equal proof. Rumors filled the vacuum left by facts. Some people whispered about an older boyfriend no one had known about. Others speculated she'd been lured by someone she met online, catfished by a carefully constructed lie. A few insisted she'd staged everything herself and was living somewhere under a new name. Each theory spread, mutated, then collapsed under scrutiny. The town grew tired of wondering. New families moved in. New scandals replaced the old tragedy. High school students who'd once known her graduated, then left. Teachers stopped pausing when her name came up in old attendance records. Even the police department moved on to cases with bodies, evidence, answers. But every so often, something small would drag her back into focus. A backpack found near a hiking trail, wrong brand. A girl matching her description seen boarding a bus, wrong age. A tip from a man claiming she'd been held against her will, no follow-up, no credibility. Each time, her family braced themselves. Each time, the truth slipped away again. The detective kept one box from the case in his office long after it should have been archived. Inside were copies of everything that didn't fit neatly into reports. Photos, handwritten notes, maps with circled areas he felt deserved another look. One location, in particular, bothered him. It was close. Too close. The place where her phone's signal died, dismissed early as unremarkable, sat just outside the radius most searches focused on. Back then, it had seemed logical to assume she'd been taken farther away. No one believed the answer could be sitting almost within sight of her home. Years later, standing there again on his lunch break, the detective felt the same chill crawl up his spine. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything felt wrong. When the case was officially labeled cold, a single line was added to the file. No further leads at this time. But unanswered questions don't freeze. They wait. And 9 years after the night she vanished, a routine digital cleanup performed by someone who had never heard her name would uncover a voice that had been there all along, waiting to be heard. The discovery happened by accident. 9 years after the night she vanished, her name surfaced not in a police database, but in a sterile corporate server room hundreds of miles away. A telecommunications technician was overseeing a routine data migration. Old accounts being purged. Legacy systems consolidated. Most of it was automated. Numbers, timestamps, metadata, digital debris. Then an error flag appeared. One voicemail file had never been delivered, never opened, never deleted. It was attached to a number long deactivated, but the timestamp froze the technician in place. The date matched a case he vaguely remembered from the news years earlier. A missing girl, a suburban town, gone without a trace. Protocol required reporting anomalies like this. Within 48 hours, the detective, the one who'd never fully let go, received a call that made him sit down slowly at his desk. "There's a voicemail," the technician said, from her phone. "Left the night she disappeared." For a moment, the detective couldn't speak. They met in a small evidence review room, the kind with no windows and too much fluorescent light. A speaker sat in the center of the table. Everyone there understood the weight of what they were about to hear. A voice preserved in time. A message never meant to survive this long. "Whenever you're ready," someone said quietly. The detective pressed play. Static crackled first. Wind. The sound of movement, footsteps on gravel maybe. Then her voice. Soft, controlled. Too controlled. "Hey, it's me," she said, breathing shallowly. I don't have a lot of time." There was a pause, longer than comfort allowed. "If something happens," her voice wavered, just slightly. "If something happens and you hear this, it's not what he told you." Another sound cut in, a male voice, distant but sharp. She lowered her own voice immediately. "I'm at the place near the The word was swallowed by interference. The old. She stopped again, as if listening. Then, carefully, she added, "Please don't come looking alone." The message ended abruptly. No goodbye. No crash. Just silence. No one moved. Her mother heard it later that night, sitting in the same living room where she'd waited all those years ago. When her daughter's voice filled the space, it felt like time folding in on itself. She pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. She knew, her mother whispered. She knew something was wrong. Investigators replayed the voicemail dozens of times. They isolated background noise, enhanced frequencies, stripped away static. What emerged was subtle but devastating. Water, faint but unmistakable, metal creaking, and a location reference investigators had dismissed early on as irrelevant. The detective pulled out his old box. Maps spread across the table once again, just like years before. He circled the same area he'd never been able to forget, a neglected industrial site near the edge of the signal radius. Closed before her disappearance. Never thoroughly searched, because it was too obvious. A team was sent there the next morning. The place looked frozen in decay. Rusted fencing, cracked concrete, weeds pushing through asphalt. Nearby, a drainage canal flowed sluggishly, its surface broken by debris and shadow. Searchers found disturbed earth near the waterline, subtle, easy to miss. They found fragments of fabric caught in reeds, fibers that matched the hoodie she'd been wearing. Then, lodged beneath a bent sheet of metal, they found something else. A phone casing. Not hers but newer, cleaner, recently dropped. Back at the station, the voicemail played again, this time with different ears listening. She wasn't calling for help, one investigator said quietly. She was leaving evidence. The detective stared at the speaker, her voice echoing faintly in the room. After 9 years of silence, the case was no longer cold. It was awake. And someone out there had always known that message existed, even if they believed no one else ever would. The voicemail stopped sounding like a message the more they listened to it. It became a map. Inside a quiet audio lab, specialists leaned over waveforms stretched across glowing monitors. Every breath, every hesitation, every background sound was isolated and examined. The technician paused the recording repeatedly, scrubbing back seconds at a time. "There," he said, "listen to that." Beneath her voice, just before she mentioned the place, there was a rhythmic clank. Not random, repetitive. Metal striking metal, dulled by distance. A loading gate. The industrial site investigators had returned to wasn't just abandoned, it had once been a transfer point. Trucks, containers, night operations. Even years after closure, the acoustics hadn't changed. She wasn't panicking, the technician continued. She was choosing her words. That realization hit harder than any scream would have. Back at the station, detectives reopened interviews they hadn't touched in nearly a decade. Friends, classmates, neighbors. This time, they weren't asking what happened. They were asking who had access. The names surfaced slowly. At first, it was barely mentioned, someone who'd been part of the periphery. A friend of a friend, older, quiet, helpful. He'd given her rides before, helped with school projects. Someone parents trusted because nothing about him felt threatening. When investigators pulled his old statements, cracks appeared immediately. His alibi had always been thin, but no one had pressed. He claimed he'd been home that night, phone dead, asleep early. Back then, no evidence contradicted him. Now, they had the voicemail. "She says he told you," the detective said, replaying the line again. "Not someone, he." They traced the unknown number from her last text. It belonged to a prepaid phone, burner, purchased with cash. But tower data placed it briefly near the same industrial site on the night she vanished. Another coincidence that no longer felt like one. Her mother listened as detectives explained what they believed the voicemail truly was. "She knew she couldn't call the police," one investigator said gently. "She knew she couldn't fight. So she did the one thing she could. She documented. She lowered her voice when he came near. She avoided saying names. She referenced places only someone familiar would understand. She left a breadcrumb trail, not for that night, but for the future. For when someone finally listened closely enough. The man was brought in for questioning again, older now, grayer, less confident. This time, he wasn't calm. When detectives played the voicemail, his composure cracked almost immediately. His jaw tightened. His breathing changed. He stared at the table instead of the speaker. "That's not what it sounds like," he muttered. "Then tell us what it does sound like," the detective replied. He couldn't. Search teams returned to the site with ground-penetrating radar. Dogs alerted near the waterline again, farther downstream this time. Evidence suggested movement, something heavy dragged, then repositioned. They didn't find her. But they found proof that someone had tried very hard to make sure they never would. Concrete poured in uneven layers, tools abandoned in haste. And, wedged deep in the mud, a small object that shouldn't have survived that long, her necklace. The one her mother swore she'd left behind. Except she hadn't. She'd taken it with her that night. Worn it. Held onto it. The realization was crushing and clarifying all at once. She hadn't run. She hadn't vanished willingly. She'd been silenced and still found a way to speak. As charges were prepared and the town braced itself for revelations it had avoided for years, the detective listened to the voicemail one final time. This time he didn't hear fear. He heard resolve. And in the quiet after the recording ended, one truth settled heavily over everyone in the room. Someone had heard this message the night she disappeared. They'd just believed it would stay buried forever. The town changed its tone overnight. News vans lined the streets that had once quietly erased her from memory. Names that hadn't been spoken publicly in years were suddenly everywhere on screens, in headlines, whispered in grocery store aisles. People who had once shrugged and said she probably ran away avoided eye contact now. Because the voicemail changed everything. Her voice, steady, deliberate, became the center of the case. It was played in court filings, dissected by experts, and eventually released to the public. When people heard it, really heard it, the narrative collapsed. This wasn't a reckless teenager chasing a secret life. This was a girl who understood she was in danger and acted with astonishing clarity. Her mother listened to the voicemail one last time in private, before the trial began. She didn't cry this time. Instead, she focused on the pauses. The way her daughter breathed. The strength it must have taken to stay calm while someone stood nearby, unaware that he was being quietly documented. In that moment, grief mixed with something else, pride. "She was so brave," her mother said softly. The suspect was charged based on circumstantial evidence, digital records, and inconsistencies that finally mattered. Without a body, the case was fragile, but the voicemail anchored everything. It established fear, coercion, and presence. It proved she hadn't disappeared on her own, and it proved someone had been with her. Search efforts continued for months. Water was drained, ground excavated, areas re-examined that had been dismissed years earlier. Though her remains were never definitively recovered, the evidence told a story that no longer required speculation. The industrial site was sealed permanently. A small memorial appeared near the edge of town, not at the place she vanished, but where she lived. Her name engraved in steel. A single line beneath it, chosen by her family. Her voice was not lost. For the detective, the case never truly ended. He kept the voicemail saved on a secured drive, labeled simply with her initials. Sometimes, late at night, he replayed it not out of obsession, but respect. It reminded him why details mattered. Why assumptions were dangerous, why silence should never be mistaken for absence. The town eventually quieted again, news cycles moved on, but something fundamental had shifted. People listened more closely now. Parents asked more questions. Friends paid attention to the things left unsaid. Because everyone understood the same haunting truth. She hadn't vanished without a trace. She'd left one hidden in plain sight, waiting 9 years for someone to care enough to find it. And even now, when her voicemail ends and the static fades, it feels less like silence and more like an echo that refuses to die.